All right. So, a couple things before we get going here. We're kind of back into that routine where after class today, you'll see that module 10 quiz pop up. You've got those practice problems. You'll also see that module 11 reading pop up. Those are both due at the end of the day on Monday. Also, CL sessions are going to kind of resume this week since we have new material for them to cover. So tonight and Monday, we'll be covering module 10. If you attend one of them, that's where you get the extra credit for the week. Same locations, times, everything that have been before. I'll also mention after the last exam, if you're thinking about kind of preparing for this final, kind of week to week, the other resource that's available to you, other than the CL sessions, my office hours, TA office hours, are those free tutoring sessions over in Wiley. I believe from memory, I've got a couple announcements I put up on Canvas throughout the semester to remind you, but I think it's 6 to 8 Tuesday, 7 to 9 Wednesday, 6 to 8 on Thursday. Okay. So obviously there's only one, that one tonight, but kind of moving forward next week, those will always be available to you as well. Okay. Any other questions for me logistically before we dive into material? Yeah, they're just dropping. Yep. Nope. You have to schedule anything. You just drop in. Yep. Any other logistical questions for me before we dive into material here? Okay. So we left off kind of thinking about some different scenarios, right? So we said, how do firms make optimal decisions? Just like consumers, they choose where marginal benefits are equal to marginal cost. The marginal benefit to the firm is the marginal revenue. If it were in a perfectly competitive market, we said the marginal revenue, how much money am I making off every unit I sell, whatever that equilibrium market price is. Okay? So we look at where that price or marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. That's our optimal quantity. At that quantity, we compare, and I'll write this out in a second, but our profit, oh, it's up there. Our profit equation is the quantity we're selling times the difference between price and average total cost. So if price is ever above my average total cost, I know my profits are positive. If I ever had a scenario where the price hits my marginal cost at a quantity, looks like my graphic's a little bit off here, but at a price below my average total, well, there I know my profits are going to be, well, price is below average total, at the negative value, I would have negative profits. And then we'll talk more about today, if this were in either scenario, firms are going to enter and exit this market, which is going to change that equilibrium price, and we're eventually going to end up at a point where profits are equal to zero. So we kind of ended on this last class, right? So before we kind of go to the decision-making process of the firm on whether or not they shut down, this is where I don't always use these at the end of class. Here we're going to look at the quiz right now, okay? So I think the code to get this in will be 10.55, right? So we're going to take a look at this first question. Right? So we're getting the class, being prepared for the entirety of class is important, right? So we've got a scenario where the firms start out with zero economic profit. We're going to look at what does a demand increase do? So this could be an increase in income for a normal good. This could be more consumers. Anything we talked about in the past that's going to increase demand. What is that going to do to the firm's profits and the equilibrium quantity they produce? Okay. So we're kind of walking through this, right? If I've got the market, and let's assume we're in a scenario where the quantity that each firm is producing, given that market price, so I've got my supply, I've got my demand curve, I have that the equilibrium price initially starts out here. We know that equilibrium price is the firm's marginal revenue, right? So at the optimal quantity, that's where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. If I start out with zero economic profits, so as a reminder, my profits are the quantity I'm selling times the difference between price and average total cost, okay? So if I have zero profits, that means that price must be equal to my average total cost, right? As long as I'm selling something, the only way this equation is zero is if price is equal to my average total cost at that optimal quantity. So if I have something, excuse me, that increases demand, so that's going to shift my demand curve to the right. What does that do to my equilibrium price? Increases it. Now, before we even go through this, intuitively, if the price is higher, what's likely going to happen to my profits? They're going to go up. If the price is higher, do I want to sell more or less than I was before? So intuitively, we can already answer this question, right? But why does that intuition, like why does that play out? Well, if we're at this new higher price, this is the firm's new marginal revenue curve. Where does marginal cost now hit my marginal revenue in this second scenario? At a quantity for the firm that is higher. All right. What's going to be true about my profits? Well, that price at that new quantity, where am I at on my average total cost curve? Right here. So that difference between price and average total cost, it's now a positive amount. Remember, price is like my per unit revenue, and my average total cost is my per unit costs. So the difference between the two is like my per unit difference between revenues and costs on my profits. So my per unit profits times the number of units I'm selling. Here, this would represent, in the second scenario, profits are positive because I don't have price equal to average total cost anymore. This new price is above my average total cost. Okay? So increases in demand will increase the quantity of the firm. And what's going to happen, the question didn't ask us about this, but what's going to happen to my quantity in the market? Well, if every firm is producing more, the quantity in the market is also going to go up. So when we have increases in demand, we get some pretty intuitive results, right? It's going to drive the price up, which means that the firms are going to produce more than they were before, and profits are going to increase, okay? Now, just to kind of walk through a little bit, why do we see that they produce more units? So just a different way of kind of thinking about this. Before, at this lower price, for every unit in this range, the amount of money I was making was lower than the cost of producing those units. So did I want to produce them? No. Now at this higher price, the price I'm selling this good for is above the cost to make those. So do I now want to sell those? Yes. So when the price goes up, there's going to be some units that before were not profitable for me to produce and provide to the market. At this higher price, they now will be. So we see the profits of the firm increase if we see demand increases in the market, and we see the quantity they will choose to produce also increases. Okay? So that was kind of our answers to question one. Profits go up. The quantity that each firm produces is also going to go up. Okay? Now, for the second question, it's going to be stuff we cover at the end of class. Just submit an answer to it. Select any one of the answers. Hopefully, by the end of class, you can then go back and revisit it, and you'll understand why the correct answer is what it is. All right, so for the first question, we just worked through it. You've got to get it correct to earn the points. For the second question, submitting any answer should reward you with kind of points for that round. Okay? So I think I have that set to be due at what? 9:50, right? So you've got plenty of time to make sure you're kind of getting that submitted. Any questions on that before we keep moving? So once again, we'll cover that second question in the class. It would be a good one to go back and review and make sure you can answer, come up with a reason why the correct answer is what it is after class today. Okay. Now, just kind of a little bit of foreshadowing here into things that we'll talk about later on in class that might make it a little bit easier once we get there. If there's positive profits, what are other people going to want to do? So I think I gave the example last class of my brother, right? During COVID, people were like buying and selling sports cars, making a ton of money. So what did he do? He started doing that. He joined that market. If we see an increase in the number of firms, people in that market selling this good, what else is going to shift in my market? Supply. right? So if we see things that increase demand in a market, that's going to generate positive profits. Firms are going to want to enter that market. What does that do? It increases my supply curve until, I guess I could call this scenario 3. Now the equilibrium price is back to whatever it was before. So if there are short-run positive profits, firms enter this market, more competition pushes that price back down until profits are back down to zero. Now there's no incentive for any firm to now join that market. So even though we have short-run shocks or shifts in demand, we know that over time, profits are going to get driven back down to zero because firms can freely enter and exit this market. Okay? We'll talk a little bit more specifically about this later on, but kind of foreshadowing that even if we have positive profits temporarily, firm entry will drive those profits back down to zero. Okay? Any questions on that before we keep moving? Okay. All right. So make sure, I think it's still open for another 5 minutes. So make sure you're kind of getting that quiz submitted. We'll kind of jump back into the slides here. All right. Anyways, so let's look at, all right, jumping back into the slides. We'll kind of then think about if instead of positive profits, I have negative profits, right? What's going to occur? Well, if I have negative profits, firms have a second decision to make. Okay. Do I stay in this market or do I just get out of it entirely? Right. Or what we'll kind of call, do I shut down? Right. Do I just produce nothing? Right. So it gets a little bit harder to think about because if I'm not in the long run, if I have negative profits, potentially staying open, even though I still have negative profits, it might be better than shutting down. Because if I shut down in the short run, what do I still have to pay? My fixed costs. So if I shut down, I know my profits are going to be negative, whatever my fixed costs are. So if I stay open, maybe I can not generate positive profits, but I can minimize my losses. Okay? So when will that occur, right? So first of all, some examples of this. Really anything seasonal is an ideal example for this, where I might shut down in the short run, even though I want to stay open, I want to stay in that industry, right? So ski resorts, I grew up in a small town in Michigan, I probably mentioned way too many times. But I used to go up to these ski resorts and go skiing. Are they open in the summer? No. Why? Because the price, you can't ski when there's no snow. So the price is going to be basically zero. I'm going to be earning negative profits. It's better if I just shut down my operations. I don't have to have any employees that I'm paying. I don't have to pay my electric bills to kind of run these things. I shut down temporarily. That's the optimal decision, producing it up. Now, when demand is higher and the price is higher, well, I want to stay in that market and be able to enjoy the positive profits that might exist when demand is higher. Right? So there are kind of firms where we see them shut down temporarily and then kind of reopen when demand is higher. So what is this shutdown rule? When does it make sense to kind of stop my operations? Okay. So if I write out my profit equation, here I've got this in the slides, but I had some questions in my earlier section. Maybe it's better to kind of draw it out for you or just kind of write it out. So did this to me last class. Sorry, I want to try to get this. I know it's a little bit, the lighting for some reason on the projector is getting a little screwed up today. There we go. All right. So my profit equation that we were using was the quantity I'm selling times the difference between price and average total costs. Okay. So I'm just going to rewrite this a little bit. What is my average total cost? It's the sum of my average variable and my average fixed. So I could rewrite this as if I'm subtracting average total costs, I'm really subtracting my average variable and my average fixed. Okay. Now, what is my average fixed cost? It's my total fixed cost divided by quantity. So if I multiply my average fixed cost times quantity, what do I have? Well, this would cancel. I simply have my fixed costs. So when I multiply average fixed cost by quantity, I could rewrite this equation as this. Right? I'm just kind of using algebra to rewrite this. Okay. So now what do we notice? If I shut down, what is quantity equal to? 0. 0 times anything is 0. So if I shut down, my profits are simply whatever my fixed costs are. Well, negative, right? I've got to pay them their costs. Now, if I stay open, right? So I produce some quantity that's positive. What are my profits from staying open? Well, here, if price is ever above my average variable costs, what is going to be true about the sign of this? It's positive. So I'm adding an amount, right? That's a positive. What am I doing to profits? I'm increasing them. Okay. So anytime price is above my average variable costs, that's increasing my profits. I actually want to stay open, right? So to put some numbers to this, just to maybe make a little bit more sense. So let's say my fixed costs are $1,000. Okay. If I stay open, let's say the price is 20, average variable costs are 10. Well, if I shut down, my profits are just negative 1,000. If I stay open, what would this be? 10 times 10, which is 100, minus that $1,000. My profits are still negative, but they're a smaller negative value. Okay. So here is an example where if price is above my average variable costs, I'm actually maximizing profits. They're still negative, but they're a smaller negative value. Okay. Now, what if I had a third scenario, right, where I'll just kind of rewrite this down here. So if I stay open, I've got quantity times price minus average variable minus my fixed costs. So if my fixed costs are still 1,000, if I shut down, I've got negative 1,000 profits. Now let's think of a scenario where price instead is below my average variable costs. So just to kind of keep the math a little bit easier, let's say I was producing 10 units. My price is still 20, but my average variable cost, I don't know, let's say is 40. Right. Well, if price is below average variable, what is true about this portion of my equation? It would be negative. So it should be decreasing my profits anymore. Sure enough, sorry, anymore, even more, right? So if I do this math, 10 times negative 20 would be negative 200 minus 1,000. Now my profits are negative 1,200, which is worse than just shutting down, right? So anytime price is below my average variable cost, my decision should be that I shut down. If price is ever above my average variable cost, it's actually better for me to stay open. So our shutdown rule, if profits are negative, I should continue to stay open and operate only if price is above average variable cost. If the price is ever below my average variable cost, I'm actually better off shutting down. Okay? So this is kind of our shutdown decision. All right. Any questions on this before we keep moving here? Yeah. Is what? So is average variable cost the same as marginal cost? No, right? In fact, when we're drawing out these cost curves, and this is where I said module 9 is going to be kind of crucial for the rest of the modules. If I were drawing out a firm's cost curves, sorry, my marginal cost looks like this. It hits my average total at its minimum point, and it hits my average variable at its minimum point, right? So marginal costs aren't the same as my averages, right? So in the short run, we really have 3 different ranges we can think about, okay? So we'll kind of walk through these. I know I've got a depiction in the slides, but I want to kind of build it out. and connect it with what we were saying here. Okay. So my marginal costs are not the same as my averages, but they hit them at their minimum point. Okay. So let's think about some different scenarios. Let's say the market price is right here. If the price was here, right? So we can kind of think about this is going to be the same as my marginal revenue. I'm going to kind of call this price positive, right? Because this is going to be the cutoff that if the price is ever anywhere above this, price now hits my marginal cost at a point that is above average total. If price is above my average total cost, what's true about profits? Price is above average total, my profits will be positive, right? So anytime the price is above that minimum point of my average total cost curve, I know the optimal production of the firm will result in positive profits. Okay? Now, what happens if the price ever falls? So think about this as kind of my second scenario. If the price ever falls below this point, well, now marginal revenue is hitting marginal cost at a point where price is below my average variable. Now, if price is below average variable, I know it also has to be less than it's less than average variable. It's definitely less than my average total. Right? Average total is average variable plus average fixed. So any price below the minimum point of my average variable cost curve, that's going to result not only in negative profits, but if price is below average variable cost, what did we say we should do? Shut down, right? I'm actually causing my losses to be the lowest possible by simply shutting down, producing nothing. And then what about this area in the middle, right? Well, anytime I have a price that's in this range, if marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost here, price is going to be what? Below my average total, but it's above my average variable, right? So it's above average variable, below my average total. If price is below average total costs, what's going to be true about profits? Price is below average total, my profits are negative, right? But if price is above my average variable, we said we should choose to stay open, right? So we kind of have these three different ranges. If the price is anywhere between that minimum point of my average total and average variable cost, I stay open, but my profits are negative. If price ever is above the minimum point of my average total cost, we said there profits will be positive, so I should definitely stay open, all right? And then if price ever falls below that minimum point of average variable cost, I know my profits would be negative, and I should choose to simply shut down. These are kind of our three different areas, our three different ranges. Right? Any questions on this idea? Yeah, if price was equal to that minimum point or equal to average variable cost, what would be true? My profits from staying open would be exactly equal to my. So I think about it this way. We said we could rearrange that profit equation to be this. If price is equal to average variable cost, if I stay open, what are my profits? Well, if this is equal, anything times zero is zero. So I would simply be left with my fixed costs. And then we said if I shut down, well, now quantity is zero. So my profits here would also simply be negative fixed costs. So that is kind of like my indifference point, right? That's the point where if the price ever goes any higher than that, I want to stay open. Price is ever below that, shut down. If the price is exactly equal to my average variable cost, I'm indifferent, right? I get the same level of profits if I stay open or shut down at that point. Yep, it's a good question. Any other questions before we keep moving? Yeah. So everything I said last class, from here on out, we're only focusing on economic profits. Yep. Any other questions before we keep moving here? Okay. So I kind of have this summarized. I think it was maybe helpful to kind of see me build that out and kind of the way that I was discussing it. Hopefully, I've provided some additional. Everyone kind of might connect to different things a little bit differently. So if I'm looking at the slides, I basically did the same thing here. I just summarized it. If we ever have a price that's in the range where it's above average total costs, I'm going to have positive profits. If I ever have a price that's below that minimum point of average total, but above the minimum of average variable, I know profits will be negative, but I should stay open. And then if price is ever in the range where I'm below that minimum point of the average variable cost, I should shut down. Okay. I also then kind of created a nice summary. Maybe if you're taking the quiz or you're thinking about studying kind of for that exam, a nice summarization of this is positive profits if price is ever above average total, negative profits if it's ever below average variable, and if it's, negative profits if it's ever below average total, and then if it's above my average variable, I stay open, minimizing my losses, even though profits are still negative. If price ever falls below average variable, I have negative profits, but it's optimal for me to simply shut down. Okay. Any questions before we keep moving here? Okay. So the next thing we'll kind of think about is what is my firm supply curve and what is my market supply curve? So if my price is ever above average variable, as that price increases, am I going to want to produce more or less? Price is going up, I'm going to want to supply more, right? This is our kind of, it looks like our standard supply curve. But if price ever falls below average variable, we said we should do that. Simply shut down. So if price ever falls below that minimum point of my average variable cost curve, what is the quantity going to be? 0, right? So I end up with this kind of weird short run supply curve where initially my supply curve is actually, even though the price is going up, I keep producing 0, right? Until that price goes above that minimum point of my average variable cost curve. Now I choose to stay open. Now, as the price increases, I start to supply more and more to the market. Okay. So my short run kind of supply curve looks a little bit goofy for the firm, but we'll kind of connect this to what we've already talked about. Making the connection between the market and the firm supply curve. Okay. So usually I did this in the other order. We're kind of now be working in a little bit different direction. But here, if I think about the quantity of the firm and the quantity of my market. Okay. So he said initially, when prices are increasing, the firm keeps producing nothing as long as that price is below that minimum point of the average variable cost curve. After that point, if the price goes up any higher, they start to supply more and more. Okay. So when we're drawing out supply curves and demand curves in the market, I didn't start the supply curve down here at 0. Right. So the reason why is because market supply is just the sum of every firm's supply. Well, if every firm for these prices is producing nothing, in the market, how much am I going to see? If every firm produces 0, the market quantity is going to be 0. So it's not until I get to this price will I ever see any units provided to the market. So when we're thinking about our supply curve, if we go way back, our supply curve always had an intercept. I didn't start at 0. The reason why it has an intercept is because we know any price here, nothing will be supplied to the market, right? The first unit supplied to the market will only be once that price is above every firm's minimum point of their average variable cost. Okay. So kind of connecting that firm supply curve to this market supply curve we've really been using all semester, right? Gives us a little bit more insight as to why that supply curve, when I'm drawing it, I don't start it at 0. Okay. Any other questions on this idea? Shouldn't be anything kind of too crazy here. Let me think if there's anything else I want to say here before I jump back to the well, so I've got something in the slides and we'll kind of review it, but I think since we're here, we'll stay here. Okay. So connecting the market to the firm's decision, we're now going to think about, we know that positive and negative profits can exist. So I worked through in that first in-class quiz question, like firms increase, like the number of firms increase. So we'll do an exact opposite example. So let's say we start out, I've got this scenario. I'm going to kind of stack these graphs here. I'm thinking about the quantity that the firm produces and the quantity we see in the market. I've got my market supply curve, my market demand curve, and I've got the equilibrium price in that market is right here. Okay. We said, what is the equilibrium price for the firm? It is there. So if I sell something, the additional revenue I'm making is the price, right? So for the firm, that market price is equal to their marginal revenue. That's what it represents for the firm. So let's think about a scenario where here's the firm's marginal cost curve, right? And we're going to start out in a scenario where here's their average total costs, okay? So at the optimal quantity, where marginal revenue, it's again, tattoo this, right? We're going to use this for all the remaining modules. Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost is going to be that optimal quantity for the firm, okay? So the kind of market quantity started here. Here's that firm's kind of optimal quantity, okay? At that quantity, what is true about my price? So remember, kind of profits are the quantity I'm selling times the difference between price and average total costs. So here, if price is above my, price is below my average total cost, this would represent my profits, but profits here, price being below average total, my initial profits are going to be negative. Any questions before I start adding some things in? So if profits are negative, right, what are firms going to want to do? So let's maybe change this a little bit because based on what we talked about, you're like, oh, maybe they'll stay open, minimize losses. Let's assume we're in the long run, right? Or that they've eliminated all of their fixed costs. Well, this could be thought of as average variable or average total, in which case if I have negative profits, that price would be not only below average total, but also below average variable, which means I should shut down. So some of these firms at this lower price, they're going to exit the market. As they exit the market, what happens to market supply? This goes back to module 3. If I have a smaller number of firms, the supply curve is going to decrease or shift to the left, right? So if my supply curve in the market decreases because firms are exiting, right? So anytime I have negative profits, those firms are going to exit the market. What's true now? That market price is higher, right? This becomes the firm's marginal revenue curve. Where does marginal revenue now hit my marginal cost? Looks like it's out here at a higher quantity. But now, if price is equal to average total cost, the profits of the firm are going to be what? So if price is equal to average total cost, this is equal to 0. 0 times anything is 0, right? So even if I start out with negative profits, we know firms are going to exit that market, which if there's fewer firms, less competition, drives the price up. That continues, right? They keep on exiting until we get back to this point where profits are now equal to 0. There's now no incentive for any firms to enter or exit this market. So it doesn't matter if we start with positive or negative profits, firm entry and exit, as long as we don't have any barriers to entry created by the government, will always push us back to this point where profits are equal to 0. Okay? Any questions on that before I add in one thing that's a little bit tricky or counterintuitive here? Okay. So maybe if I write this out instead of just saying it with words, this will kind of help some people. So what is like total market quantity? That would be assuming we have a perfectly competitive market, every firm will choose the same quantity. So what I'd really be doing is taking the number of firms and multiplying it by the quantity that each firm is producing. So here we have a weird scenario. If there was a decrease in the number of firms, so I have the quantity of the firm, if I have a supply decrease, actually goes up. But as that supply curve decreased, what happened to the quantity in the market? Well, here, the quantity in the market actually went down, right? So this isn't quite as intuitive as demand changes or shifts. Because how does each firm produce more, but there's a lower quantity in the market? What has to occur? Yeah, if I see that the quantity of the market goes down, but the number of units each firm produces go up, what has to be true? The number of firms must have went down, right? So this is why it seems kind of counterintuitive. Anytime we have a supply decrease, we know the quantity of each remaining firm will go up, but the total quantity in the market is going to go down. Now that's easier to think about when we have like firms exiting, right? We know the number of firms is going down. But this could occur if you had anything that shifted supply as well, right? So as supply shifts, we get this kind of weird, I shouldn't say weird, but not quite intuitive result. The demand shift was easier. When demand went up, the quantity of the firm and the quantity of the market went up, right? And vice versa, okay? Any questions on this idea before we keep moving here? Keep an eye on time. Okay. So we can now think about in the long run, right? So, sorry, in the short run, our industry supply curve, if there's positive or negative profits that could be created by demand shifts. Well, even if there's short run positive or negative profits, what are firms going to then do? Enter or exit the market and drive our profits back down to zero. So moving from the short to the long run, we can kind of think about, well, what are profits always going to be in the long run? Once firms can freely enter and exit, they're always going to get pushed to zero, right? So kind of already, I cheated this a little bit, right? But we really already worked through this, right? Anytime in the long run, price is above average total cost. Well, in the long run, what is my average total cost equal to? Average variable. So if price is above average total, I have positive profits. We said if price is above average variable, my decision should be that I stay open. So we know in the long run, once we eliminate fixed costs, anytime profits are positive, I'm definitely going to stay open in that market. Anytime price falls below my average total cost in the long run, that means it's also going to be below my average variable costs, right? Average total and average variable are the same thing in the long run. So we said if price is below average total, that means my profits would be negative. But if price is below average total in the long run, it must also be below my average variable. In which case, what's my shutdown decision say? I should leave that market. So it becomes easier in the long run because average total and average variable costs are the same. So there, if profits are positive, I should stay open. If profits are ever negative, I should shut down or leave the market entirely. Okay. Now, as we have firms freely enter next to this market, even if we have temporary positive or negative profits, they'll always get pushed to zero. So I think of like a, short run, a good example, I guess, would be potentially, like even if we're in the short run, like why might I want to stay in that industry? So let's say like Tesla, like when the first few years when they were creating electric cars, they were actually having negative economic profits. So what must they believe was going to occur in the long run? Demand was going to increase and the profits were going to be positive. Well, that did occur. But once Tesla started earning positive economic profits, what did other car companies start to do? Produce electric cars, driving those economic profits back down to zero. Okay? So we can enjoy temporary positive profits, but if other firms see that and they're like, well, I should be taking my resources and putting them towards that market. right? But there was profits in the electric car market that were drawing these other companies to then join it. As they joined, what did that do to the price? Drove it kind of back, or sorry, yeah, drove it back down until we had profits being equal to zero.
Like example, because like it's not perfectly competitive market, that's not making money. Like if it was perfectly competitive, would their profits be zero?
Not necessarily in the short run, right? So I could be enjoying positive profits currently if I was like, so let's even say you had more than one firm, right? And they're currently earning positive profits. Well, what are firms going to want to do? There's other firms that want to join that market. So it doesn't matter if I have one firm in this example or if I had, go back to my other example, right? If everybody's making money, oh, what's a good example of this right now? So like if ever, like I watch these YouTube videos and like they all have like the most bizarre like ads for things I would never think people want to buy. Well, why initially, maybe there was some of these YouTube video or YouTube channels that had these ads. They must have been increasing their profits. So what did other channels start to do? They all now have ads for like all these different products, right? So they, even though there was positive economic profits initially, once every other firm adopts that behavior, we now kind of get those profits driven back down to zero. Doesn't matter if we started out with one firm with positive profits or say 10 firms with positive profits. Yep. Now we'll talk about next week. It gets amplified even more if we had only one firm existing. And we'll kind of talk about what that looks like next week. Monopolies, basically. Any other questions before we keep moving here? All right, so where are we at in time? Okay, perfect. So I kind of already drew this out for us earlier, but just we looked at negative profit examples. What if I had positive economic? So the current price, I have positive profits. What did we say firms are going to want to do? If I have positive profits, firms are going to stay. But if there's positive profits, other companies are going to want to enter the market, which would shift supply to the right, drives down the equilibrium price. Kind of think about it as like the number of firms. You can almost intuitively think about this. If there's more firms, what's happening to competition? Improving. So what's that going to do to the price? Lower. Right? So more competition, more firms lowers that price until that equilibrium price in the market results in, now I'm at a point for every firm where price is equal to average total cost. Now profits are equal to zero. Right? Now, if I had the reverse being true, right, I start out with initially there's losses. Right? Well, if I have negative profits, eventually, even if in the short run it's above average variable cost and they stay open, over time and we eliminate fixed costs, my average variable cost starts to become closer and closer to my average total. In the long run, I've eliminated all my fixed costs. If price is below average total, it's also below average variable. Some firms are going to choose to shut down or leave the market. If they leave the market, less competition, what's going to happen to the price the remaining firms can charge? Going to go up. Okay? We see this supply decrease drives the price up at this higher price. That's the firm's new marginal revenue. Now we end up at a point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Price is exactly equal to average total cost, so my profits are zero. Right? So it doesn't matter what scenario we start out in. Moving towards the long run, firm entry and exit drives our profits to zero. Okay? So just different depictions of what we kind of already drew earlier. Okay? So now we kind of are going to go one step further. All right? So if firm entry and exit drives profits to be equal to zero, now let's think about what's going to be true in that long run equilibrium. Well, I know that I'm going to have zero profits. So where I'm choosing the optimal output is where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Marginal revenue is equal to the market price. And if profits are zero, the market price is equal to my average total cost. Right? And if average total cost is equal to average variable cost in the long run, everything is equal to each other. All right, that's a nice result. It's not hard to remember. that in the long run, everything that we've talked about is equal to each other. Price is equal to marginal cost, equal to marginal revenue, equal to average total cost, equal to average variable costs. Now, what's also going to be true in the long run, the equilibrium quantity that we see is also going to be at the lowest possible point on our long run average total cost curve. Okay. So we'll kind of move towards why that's the case here in a second. But in that long run equilibrium, we have chosen the lowest possible short run average total cost curve. So it puts us at the lowest possible point on our long run average total cost curve. We talked about this a little bit at the end of module 9, where that long run average total cost comes from. I'll kind of revisit this here in a second. Okay. So I got this slide in here. I've got I think a better way of depicting this here in a second. We're just going to ignore this. We don't kind of need to go through this, right? We've kind of already talked about it in a different context. I'll show you what I think is a better visual depiction here. If you go back and want to review the slides and that kind of helps make sense for you, that's fine. I think for the majority of you, I've got a different way of showing it to you that's a little bit better. Okay? So one other thing that we want to talk about before we start to think about moving to different short run average total cost curves is if I compare a short run supply curve for a firm to the long run supply curve. Well, in the long run, there's more things I can change, right? In the short run, let's say my production facilities in the US, I can hire and fire workers day to day. I can change my cost that way, but I can't move to an entirely different production facility overnight. So you can even think about this as, what if there's like a minimum wage and it increases the price I have to pay to all my workers? What might I want to do as a company? The US increases their minimum wage and I've got a ton of production workers making the minimum wage. I might want to take my production and move it to a different country entirely, right? I can't do that overnight. That might take years to actually do. So in the long run, I can be more responsive to price changes, or I can be more responsive to things that are changing in that market. If I'm more responsive, my supply curve is going to be more. What is something that measures responsiveness? We talked about in module 4, elastic. So if I can be more responsive in the long run, my supply curve is going to be more elastic, which would be flat. Right? I can respond more to changes in that market price in the long run compared to the short run. Okay. So as we have more time, we can be more responsive. Our long run supply curve is going to be more elastic or flat. So with this idea in mind of moving from that short to the long run supply curve, we're going to revisit something we talked about at the end of module 9, which is, okay, I can change my production facility. If I want to increase my quantity, at a certain point in the short run, if I'm stuck on this cost curve here, if I want to increase quantity, eventually I have to start to move to higher points of my average total cost curve. So what do I want to do? I want to try to move to a lower average total cost curve in the next month. Right? Well, once I do that, if I want to increase my quantity anymore, well, now if I keep going, now I'm increasing my average total cost again. What do I need to do? Move to the next lowest. Now, usually I think the example I gave before makes a lot of sense. To produce more units, I might, to lower my cost, move to larger production facilities where my production process can be more efficient. Right? So initially, as I'm increasing like the size of my production facility, what am I enjoying here? Well, if I'm changing this fixed factor of production and I'm moving to lower average total cost curves in the short run, I must be experiencing economies of scale, right? So anytime I have this kind of economies of scale, right, I'm changing this fixed factor of production to lower my per unit costs. If I'm a company, is lowering my per unit cost a good thing? Yes, right? So as long as I'm on this economies of scale portion of the long run average total cost curve, I want to keep changing that fixed factor of production to move to these lower short run average total cost curves. Now, past this point, if I produce any more units, if I move to larger and larger production facilities, based off what current demand is, I'm only increasing my average total cost. Does that make any sense as a firm? No. So if I have diseconomies of scale, I've changed as much as I possibly can about my fixed factors of production. I've gotten my average total or my per unit cost to be as low as possible. There's no other production facility where I can do that anymore, right? I never want to be on that diseconomies of scale portion. I want to kind of change these fixed factors of production so I'm at the lowest possible short run average total cost curve, which would put me at that minimum point of our long run average total cost. So that's why in the long run, our equilibrium for these markets pushes every firm. If I can change every fixed factor of production, I've gotten to the lowest possible point on that long run average total cost curve. We know that in the long run, firms can freely enter next to the market, so profits are equal to 0. Everything is equal, right? This goes back to price is equal to marginal revenue cost, average total cost, everything's equal. And I've now gotten to this lowest possible point on my long run average total cost. Any questions on this idea before we keep moving? Oops. So I got one more thing that kind of hopefully ties together. What is happening as we move from the short to the long run, or I'm trying to move to that lowest possible point on the long run average total cost curve? So I've got a depiction in the slides, and we'll kind of look at that. But I want to start out thinking about it in a slightly different way. Okay. So let's say, and give you, I think, some good examples of this. So let's say I'm looking at the quantity that each firm is producing. And I want to start out here with the current equilibrium price, which is that firm's marginal revenue, is exactly equal to their marginal cost at this quantity. Okay. This is my average total cost curve. All right. Now, let's assume just for a second that, like, in the short run, I've got my fixed costs in the current scenario. I've changed everything. Average total is equal to my average variable costs. All right. So at this point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, remember our profit equation is the quantity I'm selling times that difference. So what are my profits equal to in this first scenario? I'm at that minimum point of my average total cost curve. Profits must be equal to 0. Now, what if, let's say, one of these firms is able to identify an improvement in the production process? Maybe they come up with a new technology. This is like what? Why am I blanking on the word? Oh my gosh. The assembly line, sorry. Like going way back, right? The production of cars, right? What improved or made the ability to produce cars actually profitable was kind of coming up with this assembly line production process, or essentially it made the cost of producing this good lower. Right? So if I can come up with a new technology that improves my production process or lowers my marginal and average total costs, what's now the scenario? Well, nothing changed in the market. The price is still what it is, right? So where is the new kind of optimal quantity? Well, now, after this kind of discovery of this new technology by one of the firms, that optimal quantity, what is now true about my price relative to my average total cost? So in this second scenario, right, I could almost think about my price has really stayed the same, right? If price is above my new average total cost, what's true about profits now for the firm? They're positive. So I can think about this in two ways. The first way is, let's assume every firm is able to move to this lower average total cost curve, and we're in the short run. So we're moving to lower and lower average total cost curves, or we're moving down the long run average total cost curve. well, maybe temporarily firms can earn positive economic profits. But if there's positive economic profits, what do other firms start to do? Enter this market, which does what to our equilibrium price? Drives it down until we're back to profits being equal to zero. Right? So this movement from the short to the long run, at every interval, maybe we see short run positive profits, but they're continually driven back down to zero until firms can then identify, well, what's another way I can get to a lower short run average total cost curve? Temporary positive profits, firms enter, pushes it down to zero. This occurs until we've gotten to that lowest possible short run average total cost curve. There's no new technologies. There's no different size production facilities. There's nothing else we can change to lower our average total costs. Any questions on that idea? Okay with this idea? Okay. I'm going to push this one step further than what I would expect you to know on like the quiz or the exam. I would expect you to know how to do this. Okay. But I want to make this point because it's kind of interesting in a real world context, right? So let's say I was able to identify a new technology or come up with a new technology that lowered my cost curve. Okay. Now, that gives me positive profits, but what did that come at? I didn't really factor this in, but in order to do that, come up with this new technology, I might have had to spend a lot of money, right? So I might have had this huge fixed cost. The only way that makes sense for me as a firm is if the positive profits I can generate are greater than this fixed cost, right? This increase in the fixed cost. Well, the problem is if I come up with this new technology, what is every other firm going to try to do? Reverse engineer it or use it. What did those other firms have to do in terms of paying for this new tech? They didn't invest millions of dollars in coming up with this new technology. So for them, they don't really have to incur the additional costs, but they get to enjoy the additional benefits. So this goes back to an earlier module. If that's the case, what is every firm going to do? Hope that somebody else invests in this new technology, I'll then steal it, right? I have none of the cost, enjoy all the benefits, right? So every company hopes someone else does it. We end up with, you might not remember this term, but what we call the free rider problem, right? In which case, if every firm is relying on someone else to make this investment in technology, who invests in technology? Nobody. Is that good for society? No. What exists from new technologies in society? Positive externalities. So one thing we didn't talk about, we talked about when we were looking at the market overall, we can use subsidies to solve the positive externality problem. There's actually another thing we can do if it's kind of related to these positive externalities or related to like coming up with new technologies. So we could subsidize these new technologies, in which case it cancels out the investment by the firms. But what can we also do without using subsidies, without incurring any additional expense to the government? Well, if I come up with a new technology, what is something that prevents other people from using it? Patents, right? So if I have a patent, I come up with this new technology, the increase in my profits is greater than the investment I had to make. I now would actually invest in that technology only if other firms can be prevented from stealing that technology. So for every other firm in this market, their profits might still stay at zero, but the one firm that came up with this new technology and has a patent, they could enjoy positive economic profits. Now, technically, this would no longer be a perfectly competitive market because one firm now has an advantage because of this patent. But even though it might be not a good thing for the market, who is it a good thing for? Or who would it maximize surplus for? Society. Right? So we didn't talk about them back in module 7, but patents are another way that we can kind of solve this positive externality issue. Okay? The market without patents will never come up with this new technology. will never lower the per unit costs that exist in this market. So what's one way we can kind of solve the issue? Patents, basically. Okay. Does that, any questions on that? Once again, I won't push you as far as like thinking about patents on the quiz or the exam, but this idea of moving to lower cost curves, it not only allows us to understand the movement down the long run average total cost curve, as long as we have economies of scale, right? It also allows us to think about things like patents and why we might want to protect these huge investments that firms are making. Now, I'll also make kind of the opposite point. So if we go back to the slides, I kind of had a scenario here, very similar, right? We start out, every firm has zero economic profits. Maybe now we're not thinking about new technologies, but simply moving to larger production facilities. They can lower their short run average total cost curve. Profits are now positive. Firms are then going to kind of enter this market until profits get driven back down to zero. But another way we can think about it, this only represents moving to lower cost curves because I'm changing a fixed factor of production. This will only occur if I have what? Economies of scale. If I were to scale up my production anymore, if my average total cost curve starts to increase, well, if the price in the market stays the same, I'm changing this fixed factor of production and I have diseconomies of scale. I'm essentially moving to higher average total cost curves. What would I actually be doing to my profits there? Instead of increasing them, I would be decreasing them. So whenever I get to that lowest possible point on my long run average total cost curve, past that point, I have diseconomies of scale. What would I be doing to my profits? Decreasing them. So would I ever want to do that? No. Which is why when we look around at different companies, as they change these fixed factors of production or they adopt these new technologies, we're kind of looking across companies. They generally have like similar production processes, similar size production facilities, right? As we move towards the long run, we see every firm choose to be on the same exact short run average total cost curve, which will be the one that puts us at the lowest point of the long run average. Any questions on this idea as we kind of where are we at in time? All right. So kind of some conclusions about what we just talked about. We know that as long as firms face the same cost structures, right? As long as they kind of have the same marginal and average total costs, we're always going to end up with zero profits as long as firms can freely enter and exit this market. Okay. So even if we have short run, temporary, positive or negative profits, firm entry and exit will always drive us to profits being equal to zero, as long as there's no patents, right, that allow there to be any difference in the cost structures of these firms. Okay. And then basically this final one is just saying that, look, if I see any other firm adopting a production process or a technology that's lowering their costs, I'm going to mimic that, right? And if there's anything I can do, to lower my cost curve, everyone has the same incentive. It's always going to push us down to this equilibrium point where profits are equal to zero, or basically every firm, there's nothing else they could do that would no longer benefit. Every single benefit to them, they're trying to maximize their own profits. Every firm is going to take advantage of these things that increase their profits, which are always going to push us down to this equilibrium point where profits are equal to zero. Even if it's not the existing firms, we'll see firms join that market, pushing us down to that. So this is kind of just a summary of what we've really been talking about all class. Any other questions over anything we talked about today? I've got a little bit more I want to kind of end with here. Okay. So it shouldn't matter for the quiz this week. I put up an Excel file that I don't think we'll quite have time, even if we try to do it the remainder of class today. I'll probably revisit it next week, just to kind of think about firms' costs and the equilibrium price before we really dive into monopolies next week. So monopolies is instead of having perfect competition, we have one firm, so there would be no competition, right? We're looking at the two extremes first. So to kind of give a roadmap of where we're going, right? Next week, when we look at monopolies, I'm going to assign the next Canvas discussion after Thursday. So I'm going to do things a little bit different, right? I'm not naive in the sense that, like, outside of this classroom, I think that nobody's using generative AI tools. In fact, if we're not, you're not exploiting all the possible benefits that exist to you, right? Now, I have two things to say about this. So I know a lot of you are using this in the campus discussions, and I don't have any, right? So I've been trying to think about, I actually been taking a course on how to integrate AI into the classroom. So the fourth campus discussion, likely the fifth, we'll see how the fourth one goes. I'm going to change it a little bit from what the other ones have looked like. Now, it's still going to be a similar structure in terms of you have your initial post and then you reply to others. And I'll have the instructions out next week, but it's going to be a little bit more. I'm going to tell you to use a generative AI tool and then try to use it to learn. So first of all, these generative AI tools are not threat-based. I've run my materials through it. I think it's like 80 to 90%, depending on what I do. The more graphs and visuals I use, the poorer it actually performs. And so I'm going to have you identify in your prompts, what is it getting wrong? Or in other kind of students, like what they got, might it not be getting quite right? Or what is it not factoring in that maybe we've talked about? So more of like you evaluating how well the generative AI tool is doing, right? And I think in identifying those issues, part of it's also going to be how can you change your prompt? How could you be more specific in your prompt to generate better responses from these AI tools? This is something all of you should be thinking about moving forward. Because just like these firms, you're essentially supplying your labor. So what do you want to try to do? Adopt these new technologies, right? Profits for you are essentially increases in your income, right? It's going to work the same way. Now, we won't dive into labor markets here, but you're supplying your labor. It's the same like for firms providing their units to the market. So another thing I'll kind of mention is I know also a lot of you are using these on the quiz. I've gotten a lot of people stopping in my office yesterday after the exam too, looking at their performance. And I asked you, how are you doing these quizzes? An honest answer I often get is I'm using generative AI. I'm using AI to help me get the answers correct. That's fine and well, right? That's helping you increase your quiz score and helping you increase your grade. But if you don't understand why you're getting the answer you are from AI, this generative AI tool, what then happens on the exam? Do you have access to that? No. So do you get the question correct? No. You want to start thinking about how you can use these generative AI tools, not just to get the correct answer, but to also explain to you why it came up with that answer. In doing that, first of all, that's going to help you not just get the correct answer, but help you think about the correct reasoning behind why the correct answer is what it is, and then also help you identify when AI is getting it wrong, right? Some of these questions, I see similar wrong answers because I probably know that like AI is pretty bad at this type of a question. And lo and behold, what questions that tend to get wrong the most? Things where I use a graph, right? Not just kind of these word problems, right? Or not just a numeric problem. So start to think about in all of your classes. This is more of like me going on a bit of a rant here, but we'll still go a little bit early. It's not a rant. I don't hate AI. A lot of other professors are probably like trying to police it and like very angry that you use it. You should be using it. That'd be like me telling you not to use a calculator or a computer. I'm gonna watch my language here and post these, but like that is the dumbest thing ever, right? We need to learn how to use these technologies efficiently, right? Like, for example, using a calculator, I can use it wrong if I don't understand order of operations. I don't put my parentheses in there. I'm like, well, Professor Landis, the calculator is telling me this. Well, if you don't understand order of operations, you don't understand that you gave it a wrong prompt. If you don't understand the underlying concepts, you don't understand generative AI gave you a wrong answer because you didn't give it the right prompt. AI is just going to be a new calculator, right? So don't just use it to kind of simply plug and play. Think about why it's giving you the, throw in additional prompts for it to explain to you why it gave you that correct answer. So don't avoid it. You guys, maybe for other classes where professors are trying to police it and know any better. but I think it'd be something, just think about a little bit hard about how you use it. I'm going to try to incorporate into that next Canvas discussion coming up next week. Okay. So that's my spiel. Have a fun, safe weekend. I will see you guys on Tuesday.